Mm, great, man. I just took a big spoon of Bombay, this cocoa powder. I
I
was
should
like,
process that.
yeah, late. No, a minute early. Amazing. And by the way, all the technical issues are resolved. Thank you.
Oh, awesome, awesome.
There, man.
Yeah, no problem.
Mm. How you doing today, man? How's your week been?
Pretty good. Just cut the grass, so feeling great.
Nice.
Yeah, it's my one of my favorite things to do is tend to the lawn. I'll be able to sit out there in the morning, listen to the birds, and watch the clouds come in and the dew. And it's super cloudy in Texas this time of year, and so it's the weather's perfect in the morning. So
I love it,
then
man.
nobody's up at like 6:30, and you just the birds are all out, and it's pretty neat.
Well, it's good to finally be able to sit down and have a longer, more detailed conversation with you, man. You've been
Yeah.
really sticking in my mind is it's actually quite interesting because I'm almost done with putting together for Waking Warrior recovering from PTSD course and shortly followed by a transition course. So I'm
Cool.
really excited to have this conversation and dig into your healing path and the things that you struggled with and how you found a way out of it. But I
Yeah.
think I might have mentioned the purpose for these podcasts is I want to have 1,000 of them or more, and like show our veteran brothers and sisters that they're not alone and that there are many, many ways to solve their challenges and heal. So
Yeah.
I'd love to get a couple of minutes of background, man, about you. Tell us about yourself. Like maybe you could start with early life or army, whatever, man. I'm open for anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you want to launch in like the full thing or just background or context?
Up to you. I'm
Okay.
fine with either, but maybe a little bit of background so that folks that are listening can get a little bit of information about you because you were in like psyops and spec ops,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I always like to start with my values, and so
Mm.
this came as a result of my process, and so we'll of course get into here in a little bit, but um, my value statement is I'm committed to keeping three aligned promises, and that's take care of myself, always be available to my family, and constantly seek to serve others. And so with those five values of trust, alignment, self-care, family, and service, that's really the lens that I make a lot of my decisions through, and how I look at the world at this point. And those can change. I changed one back in January, and so it's something that really helps guide me through my recovery. So that being said, I always start with my family. My wife Jen and I have been married for 20 years, and we have two boys, John and William, 15 and 13, and great kids into sports and academics, and couldn't ask for a couple better boys. They're pretty awesome. So um, that's a good thing. And then for me, I retired from the Army back in November, and I transitioned from the Army into coaching, niching down right now into a very specific niche that I'm still developing out, but currently calling myself a leadership coach a little bit more broadly. And so once that new niche comes out, I'm developing a program and some products for it. I'll put that out. But it's a little bit about that niche is helping folks who have gone through something very similar to what I've gone through, and helping them get back into the workforce. And so um, that and uh, really informs what keeps me grounded, which is service. And
Mm.
so in that order, self-care, I make sure that I'm good physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, so that I can be good for my family and available for them. And then once that's taken care of, then I seek to serve others. And then that service is what gets me out of myself and is able to help me stay firm in my recovery. And that service looks like volunteering with veteran organizations. The Military Officers Association of America is the local chapter. The Alamo chapter is a local chapter here in San Antonio. And so I'm on their board. We do a lot of work on behalf of all veterans in the legislature, whether it's here in Austin, in Texas, or on the national level. We make sure that veterans are getting the benefits that they've earned over the course of their careers. It also looks
Mm.
like going down to the food bank with my two boys and volunteering there. My oldest also volunteers at the animal shelter, so I go and do that with
Uh,
him as well. And so it's hard not to bring home some pets.
I feel you. I have one, and that
Yeah.
keeps my hands full, man. How many do you have currently?
So we have zero pets. My wife is deathly allergic to cats and dogs, and
Oh
so
no.
yeah, that's his way to get us fixed. Is to well, all of us really. We go and we walk dogs and clean out their kennels and play with them and stuff like that. So and then we can leave that there, so they can find good homes, and then we come home and yeah, we're just the family here at the house.
I love that. I appreciate that. That start off with the values as well. I think that's
Yeah.
one thing that I definitely work with, like when I work with veterans, like starting off with the values and kind of their North Star and where they're headed is extremely important too. Brief side note though, if you looked into Yorkie Terriers, because Yorkie Terriers are hypoallergenic, it's the second coat of fur on dogs and
Oh,
cats. That's what
what
causes
did
the
I do?
allergies. But Yorkies only have one layer of fur, so they don't shed.
Nah, what is that? A boy, girl? What do we got there?
He's a boy. He's a boy. He's
Oh,
going with me everywhere. He's been surfing. We traveled by motorcycle for 8 months all around Latin America and Central America.
wow,
He goes absolutely everywhere with me.
that's cool. That's cool. Little motorcycle diaries action.
Yeah, we actually have a YouTube channel, Adventures with Scotty and Chewy. So if you want to see his little ears flapping in the wind, it might give your kids a kick.
Yeah, Scotty and Chewy. I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah, I'll send it over after, man.
Yeah,
Yes, I'm curious. Like, what prompted you to join the military in the first place?
that's a great question. So my family has a really long history of service. I've traced family service on my side anyway back to the Civil War when my family first came over from Europe. So we've
I
had
won't ask
family.
which side. I grew up in North Carolina and Tennessee, so I just want to ask.
Well, it's funny. We actually have family on both sides on my dad's side, and so Ohio and Tennessee, and so
Oh, nice.
uh,
So nice
yeah,
spread.
we were going to win either way. So
Yeah, that's hedging your
um,
bets in the best
yeah,
possible way, man.
that's right. And so yep. So family service all the way back to that point, and then service throughout. And so coming up, I was raised in service. I was raised in Boy Scouts, volunteering through church, things like that. And so I'd always felt that drive to serve as a kid, and then paired that with my family history of service, and then the fact that if you get an ROTC scholarship, they'll pay for college. And kind of
Mhm.
taking those things into consideration, I looked down the Army path. I went to a military high school, New Mexico Military Institute, and so my last 2 years of high school were at a military high school, which really taught me to love the structure and the formality of the military. I taught my brother to hate it, and so he went on a different path.
Mhm.
And so it was through JROTC, ROTC, and then the Army. I tell people that I've had a closet, or excuse me, a uniform hanging in my closet since I was 6 years old.
That's intense,
Starting
man.
with Cub Scouts, and so as of November, this is the first time I have not had a uniform to wear, and so it's been interesting.
Yeah, I feel you. I think one of the small things that people don't really realize, like once you get out of a career of service and you've been told to what to wear for your entire life, it's actually kind of difficult to figure out what to wear, you know?
Yeah, I have like 4 shirts, and so
I feel you.
my wife and I went shopping after I retired. Like, let's get some real clothes and maybe upgrade the one suit I've had since like 2006. So
Mm. So it was the family tradition of service that really meant you were destined for the military, really.
yeah, family history of service and just my own innate desire to serve. And I was commissioned 4 months before 9/11, so there was no war on, anything like that. And a friend of mine asked me, "Aren't you afraid we're going to go to war at some point?" And I said, "When's the last time we had a war?" And then 4 months
Yeah.
later, 9/11 happened, and then 18 months later, I found myself, actually, yeah, 2 years later, I found myself in Iraq.
Oh man. What was that? What was your service like for you? How was the experience? Because how long were you
um,
in total again?
yeah, so
Like,
22 and a half years.
wow, wow.
Yeah, and so uh, I really enjoyed serving. Just the ability to work with people from all over, not even all over the country, but I mean all over the world. And we've had soldiers from everywhere that would enlist, and just that sense of camaraderie that I grew up with in Boy Scouts and playing team sports and things like that. The ability to help people was a big one for me, especially later in my career, where you're able to sit down and uh, develop somebody and help them work through challenges and opportunities and offer them resources to do those things really appealed to me later in my career. And so the type of work I did in psychological operations, I really loved the last 16 years of my career, just because I've always found human behavior and group behavior really interesting. And the first 5 years I was field artillery, and so I got a lot of my combat time was on the ground as a fire support officer with the infantry, and third of the 187.
I was field artillery too.
Yeah, there you go. So you know the drill. And
fire support officer and mortar platoon leader.
Yeah, I did the exact same jobs in third of the 187 over in the 101st, and so I'm a proud Rakkasan out in the 101. And I get one of two responses when I tell people I'm a Rakkasan. It's either, "Oh yeah, cool, me too," or "Oh God." So,
I imagine
it's been a great career.
Imagine in the special forces community, you also got your jump wings as well. I'm sure, right?
Yeah, I actually got those right out of officer basic course, and so in high school or in college, I opted to go to air assault school first, and then I ended up getting picked up for the 101st. And then at officer basic course, they said, "Hey, anybody want to go to jump school? We've got some slots." And so I showed up to my first unit with air assault and airborne wings, and my commander was like, "Oh, awesome! We can put you straight to work. We don't have to send you to air assault school." And so that was pretty neat.
Very cool. So I mentioned, like, one of the things that I caught on pretty early was your amazing and vulnerable LinkedIn posts about some of the difficulties you had in your service. What were some of those like?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so really ever since high school, as far back as I can remember at that point, I've always struggled with perfectionism and people pleasing. My brain always worked in such a way that I thought, if something is not good, then it's bad. There's no gray area. And so everything that I ever did, I wanted it to be good. And so that fostered a sense of perfection in everything that I did, because if it's not 100%, then it's nothing. If it's 99%, it's nothing. And that was a self-imposed limitation. A lot of times folks will link that back to their childhood. I think I had a pretty good childhood to middle-class parents. And it was just a standard that I felt was necessary at the time, that grew with me as I went through my career. People pleasing was another big thing. I love to see the smile on people's faces, and I get addicted to that. And sometimes I would say yes to things that I knew, or in the back of my mind, I kind of knew I couldn't follow through with, and I would end up backtracking later, which built into me a little bit of a sense of if I can't do it 100%, or if I can't make somebody happy with it, I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to try. So I was super risk averse early in my career, which is not a good place to be when you're heading into Iraq to lead soldiers. And so that caused a lot of dissonance in my brain. How do I protect these guys, get the mission accomplished, but don't take any risk in the middle? And so my brain always worked overtime. Like, how can I chart every single path, every single variable, which of course you can't do because there are things that are outside of my control. And so that's really where I had a lot of that initial stress, was with that dissonance in my brain of how do I avoid risk but still get things done. Excuse me.
Yep.
And so that, coupled with the perfectionism and the people pleasing, was really, really tough to all hold together. And again, these are all standards that had been in my own brain that I developed and just normalized. Went through 2 rotations in Iraq, and then I started to get promoted and come into leadership positions. I started to foster the sense of imposter syndrome. Like, oh man, the only reason I'm getting promoted is because I had some great NCOs, or the commander only saw me when I was doing well, and so. I never felt like I belonged in those positions, and I was just stumbling through them. And so the imposter syndrome, the perfectionism, and the people pleasing all came together to make me just this rabid workaholic. I would spend all the time I could at work making sure everything was perfect, because I didn't want people to find out that, this is a little bit of sarcasm, but to find out who I really was on the inside. And If they only knew that I wasn't this great person that was on paper, then they would never would have promoted me and things like that. So I had to make sure that I started to build this thing I called the work wall that people were never going to be able to see through and look over the top of, because all they were going to see was this perfect guy, this stellar soldier, perfect individual, with no vulnerability. And that was that. And that came back to bite me later in my career.
What was that like? How did it come back to bite you? Was it like sort of like how did it bite you?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I started to progress throughout my career, these just feelings and sentiments continued to grow. I got married, we started to have kids. And at some point I was just like, I can't deal with this. And I'd been a drinker through college, but everybody was, all the folks that I hung out with were, and I started to become more of a drinker than they were. And I started to hang out with people who drank like I did to help me normalize it. And the reason I drank was to
easy to find in the Army.
Yeah. Even to find in the Army. I did it so that I could so I could numb all these thoughts in my brain, get them out of there, just make them go away. And it worked for a long time. I could sit down on the sofa and go through however much alcohol until, I passed on the sofa, and I would, do it again in a couple of days. And the frequency of my drinking to blackout started to increase. I would say exponentially. It'd go from like once every 2 weeks to like once a week to like at the end it was every day. And that was to numb that feeling of, imposter syndrome and perfectionism and people pleasing. And the Army rewarded me well for building that work wall. I was promoted below the zone to major to lieutenant colonel. And it was because I was always at work and I was always producing above and beyond what people asked me to do, because I did not want to be that guy that said, oh, it failed because of Eric. So my 100% was other people's 200%. And my family life started to suffer. I wasn't spending as much time as I should have with my kids, my wife. Didn't have any friends because I didn't have time for social stuff. And I had friends, but they were all very superficial. Just, people you say hi to in the neighborhood and stuff. And then I was also afraid to have friends because they might see who I really was. And so the alcohol was the only thing that I could turn to that made it go away until I could deal with it later. And so that's where, a lot of the self-medication came in, and a lot of that, just inability to cope. And so I had to use something external to myself to cope with all that.
Was there, because it sounds like, on paper you were a stellar soldier. You've married Jen probably 2 or 3 years into your military service?
Yeah,
You've
right
been together
about
for 20 years?
Yeah, just over our 3-year mark.
So like, what was it? Was there something, I don't know, like what were the thoughts that were kind of circulating in your mind, like about this, I'm not enough, or I'm an imposter? Was it just thoughts, or was there something behind it? Was there like something that you were doing outside of the alcohol that was, but it sounds like you didn't have any time to do anything bad. You were working all the time.
Yeah, it was just put your head down and work. And so like I used to keep a cot in my office when I was an S3, and I thought if I slept in my office, that made me a better S3. That's the kind of logic I had, because I didn't know anything else. I couldn't accept anything else, because vulnerability was foreign to me. Like asking for help was not a thing. And that was another reason, I turned to drinking. And, back in 2011, I actually got super drunk at my brother's wedding and made a fool of myself, and, made my wife angry, made my family angry. And so I said, well, you know what? I'm going to go to ASAP. I'm going to show you guys that I can do this, and you guys can stop being mad at me. So I'm going to go to the Army Substance and Alcohol Abuse Program. We were at Fort Leavenworth at the time. So I went through, and they asked me the best question you could ever ask an alcoholic, which is, do you want to stop or do you just want to cut back? And I'm like, oh yeah, of course, I just want to cut back. And so, yeah. And so, I went through that program. They had me go to AA there in Leavenworth, Kansas. And I went to my first meeting, and I was like, I am not like like these people. I still have a job. I still have a car. I still have my wife. I don't live under a bridge. You're old. You're ugly. You smell like smoke.
Hmm.
I'm not like anybody here. And so I was like, yeah, this is not me. I can drink just fine. And so I think I gave up drinking for about 3 months, and then we went back to Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, and I started drinking again. I went on another 7-year, relapse, if you will. And so, yeah, I was identifying with what people had and their outside as opposed to what was on their inside, and that was the big change for me the second time around.
What was there an effect during this time, both with the kind of the giving 100% at work, between that and the alcohol? What effect did that have on Jen and the family?
Yeah, so Jen will tell you that she was not necessarily an enabler, but she was a protector. She was protecting my career, and she was protecting my perception of people had of the family and things like that. And so we would, do things like, so I remember one time I was supposed to go to a formal event, and Jen had done, her hair up, had her dress on. I would have my mess dress on. I said, you know what, I'm just going to pregame a little bit, and I'm going to go and just have a couple drinks. Well, I ended up drinking to blackout. We never left the house. And so she just told people, well, Eric's not feeling well, right? And so because it's embarrassing for her, she's not going to tell people that her husband passed out drunk, because she's trying to protect me. She's trying to protect the boys and how people saw us as a family. She didn't have the tools at that point either to deal with what was going on with me, and me putting her in that position was obviously not fair to her. And so she just was just trying to hold things together essentially as we went through, and so fortunately, her and I, she's in her own program of recovery.
Fantastic.
That she goes through. I have my own program of recovery, and we now speak the same recovery language. And so that's super, super helpful to have Jen on board.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've also realized after having a lot of these conversations is that we spend a lot of time about the service members and what they're going through, but I think we need to have a better focus on the service members' support network, their families, their wives, the people that have taken care of them, because oftentimes they're the supporters, and that sort of trauma, that stuff that we're going through can also filter over towards them. So I'm really super glad to hear that she's in a recovery program of her own. And honestly, man, I just want to say thank you and applaud you for being so vulnerable and so open about something that a lot of people wouldn't talk about very openly. I think that's something that we really desperately need of more.
Yeah, I used to view vulnerability as a weakness, and then I realized it takes incredible strength to be vulnerable, and that was really my saving grace through recovery, was that vulnerability and the ability to open up, because I firmly believe that I couldn't have asked for help if I hadn't have opened up. And I found through recovery too that after I went through treatment, I was like, okay, so what do I do with this experience that I have now? And at first I was like, well, I just won't tell anybody, but it's hard to do when you're a battalion commander and you don't show back up to work. People are going to find out pretty quickly. And so I really had no choice but to talk about it, which I'm glad that's how it happened, because the more I talk about it, the more I think my recovery advances, and the more it allows other people to be vulnerable with themselves. And then I've had people reach out and say, hey, I've experienced something like that too. I may need a little help as well. In fact, when I came back and spoke to my battalion after treatment, I told them what happened and where I was and what I was going to do going forward. And the first sergeants came up to me a couple of days later and told me, and to be clear, I was not in command of the battalion. They had moved me out. They'd brought somebody else in to take the battalion to move it forward. And just through informal communication, a couple of the other first sergeants told me that they had in total 4 soldiers come up to the first sergeants and say, we think we need to go into something, akin to what Eric went into. And so that was the first positive sign that I saw of being vulnerable and talking about it, was that feedback that other folks related to the story and stepped forward and said they needed help as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the true essences of leadership. Leading yourself first and setting an example, inviting others to do the same. So was this triggered by something that you haven't talked about, or was this due to your voluntary entry to the ASAP program?
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that well, I'll just tell you kind of how it happened. So I'd been in battalion command for about a year at that point. And I see the start of the negative spiral in May of 2018. I got my first evaluation as a battalion commander, and it was like, um, you know, top SIAP battalion commander in First Special Forces Command. It was top SIAP lieutenant colonel in First Special Forces Command, top choice to command at the next level. And I thought, wow, if the general only knew who I really was, he wouldn't have written this about me. I thought, this must not be my evaluation. What if he finds out? What if somebody else finds out that this is not really me? And that was linked kind of indirectly. I didn't consciously think about it at the time, but it was linked to. I mean, I got to drink every night just to cope with being in command,
Mm.
and so there's a lot of shame there, a lot of guilt there, and 2 months later, we went out to Colorado for my wife's cousin's wedding out there. We were stationed at Fort Bragg at the time, and there was an open bar at the reception, which is, was a great tool for me because at this point, I was like, I got to get a drink because I can't deal with all these people asking me how my career is going, and I just got to get into a drink. And so the last thing I remember was having dinner with my family, and the next thing I remember was staring up at the stars. And I thought, okay, what's going on here? And
Oh,
yeah, and then all of a sudden, as I started to come to, I saw blue and red lights, and I was like, "Crap! That's either the cops or an ambulance." It turns out it was an ambulance. There were some EMTs looking at me, and they were, checking vitals, and I had a collar on, and I was like, "What the heck is going on?" And um, it was, before the EMTs, they came into my field of vision. I just saw the stars, and that was the most serene I had felt in a long, long time. And so I would consider that my spiritual awakening as part of my recovery
mm.
process was that just total silence. Everything had been blocked out, but as I came to, I just saw, a beautiful night sky, with stars. And I thought, and it was eerily calm at that point. I thought, oh, everything's going to be cool, and I didn't know why I felt that, but that's how I felt it in the moment. And then the paramedics are coming in. I could see the lights. I could hear Jen crying over here off to the side, and I'm like, somebody has severely overreacted by calling the ambulance because I am a-okay, right? As the EMTs are working on me, and so I just kept quiet. I didn't say anything. I had the collar on. I couldn't talk, and they're loading me into the ambulance, and I have no clue what's going on. I'm still in that blackout, flashbulb memory type phase, and they take me to the hospital. There's a police officer there at the hospital, and I said, "Oh, this isn't good." And so,
Oh man.
yeah, he's talking to me, and he goes, "Hey, man, from one veteran to another, it's going to be okay." And I thought, what is this guy talking about? And so I just looked at him like this, like, what the heck? And he said, "Well, do you know what happened?" And I said, "No." I shook my head. No, I don't have any idea what happened. He goes, "You took your belt and you threw it over the branch of a tree and you tried to hang yourself with it." And I
Oh
have
man.
no memory of that. And so what ended up happening is I had been successful in rigging this thing up, and two people who were out there taking a walk actually saw me, out in the tree line at night, and they went over and they brought me down. And so thankfully those folks were out there and were able to do that. And so at that point, I knew things were going to change pretty significantly for me. And when my wife came into the room, the first thing I said to her was, "Thank God it's over." And that I didn't really have an appreciation for that phrase once when I was laying there in that bed, but now I realize what I think I meant by that, which was, now everybody's going to know. I'm going to be forced to be vulnerable, and I can
Mm.
start working on this now, and I don't have to hide it. I can bring it out into the open, and I can get help for this thing. And so that was out in Fort Carson, Colorado. Came back to Fort Bragg for a week, and then I was off to the Farley Center in Williamsburg, Virginia, for 2 months for treatment.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's maybe something that people listening to this story could probably take some hope in. Like when we're in these sort of experiences, it feels like the worst thing possible to do would be to have people know about it. But there's a sense of relief and freedom that comes on the other end of saying, "Hey, I need help," even if you're forced to do it.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly how I viewed it as well. And I tell people all the time, I didn't make the decision, so God made it for me.
Mm,
He put me in that position and um, forced me to get help essentially. Um, and it's at that point I knew people were going to know about it, and I knew I was going to have to face it head on, and it was just relief that whole time because I worked so hard to try and hide it, that now I knew I could put that burden down and start to get help for it. And so yeah, it's scary, absolutely scary. In fact, before they released me out of Evans Army Community Hospital, I told the doc, I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I'm scared out of my mind. I've never done this before. I've always had the right answers. I don't know what to do. And it was just that vulnerability that I was like, where did this come from? I've never, you know, confided in anybody that I didn't know what to do, or I don't have the next right answer or anything like that. And so I think that's where the vulnerability journey started.
mm. What turned you on to vulnerability? Was it reading some of Brene Brown's work, or what was the thing that kind of clicked for you?
Um, Nothing specific. It was just every time I would share my story, I felt better. Um,
Mm,
Whether it was in recovery groups, whether it was speaking to groups of soldiers and their spouses. My wife and I had spoken through a couple of programs with the Special Forces Charitable Trust. It was just soldiers and their spouses, and we would speak about it. And every time I would come off of the stage or out from behind the mic, I just felt so much better. Or when I would write about it, I would feel better. And after a while, I started to think, why do I feel so much better after I do this? And there's a couple of different reasons. One was just retelling it helps me to process it each time. Even now, um, it just helps work through it and talk it out and get it out there. The next thing is people always tend to reach out when I'm vulnerable, and they say, "Hey, I can relate to your story. This is what happened to me." And I would say I've got hundreds of connections on LinkedIn from a DM that said, "Hey, I really really related to the story you posted. This is what happened to me," and we'll just go back and forth and chat. And I realized that my vulnerability is helping other people. And that's when I really started to take a look at, what is vulnerability? How does it help people? How do we get other people to be vulnerable? And I've realized, and I shared this too on a couple of posts, is that if we want others to be vulnerable, we have to be vulnerable first. And it's not a tit for
leadership.
tat. Yeah, it's not. You're
Mm,
exactly right. You're exactly right. And even with kids, like my son has a bad day at school. Hey, what happened at school today? Why are you sad? That doesn't work very well for my kids. What works well for my kids is, oh man, I had a rough day today. This is what happened, X, Y, and Z. How was your day? And they may not answer me till 2 days later. And but it's something that I try to do with my own kids and with Jen on a frequent basis, and just say, man, I feel tired. Man, I feel pretty sad today because of X, Y, and Z. Or I had a great day today. This is why. And I have found that my kids respond really, really well to that when I come up to them and say, "Hey, I had a rough day today. It looks like you may have had a rough day. What's going on?" And so I think that directly translates to our soldiers and anybody that we lead as well.
yeah. With the drinking, do you think it was all stress related from kind of work pressures, or were there things that you had experienced in the army that the alcohol was also helping kind of keep at bay?
Um, there was, yeah. So a lot of it was from work pressure. We went through Iraq. I got to my unit after. So the timeline's interesting because I was in the artillery unit as a fire direction officer during the combat operations, and so we were putting rounds downrange in support of the infantry guys. And then once the combat operations stopped, then we switched over, and that's when I became the FSO. And so, there wasn't a whole lot of combat trauma, I would say. Um, and as part of my story. Most of it was mental health related, and it was, depression, anxiety. So I got the depression diagnosis, the anxiety diagnosis, and they have a caveat, and I'm not sure how official this is, but my record says alcohol-induced depression, alcohol-induced anxiety. And so it's one of those things that was brought on by my inability to process outside of using alcohol.
Interesting. My general view of anxiety and depression is they're not root causes, or typically symptoms of something. But I wonder if, like, I'm guessing, alcohol as a depressant could probably change the brain chemistry in such a way that you would get those symptoms from the alcohol abuse, which is a cover up for other things that were going on. It's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah. And, I've not studied this in any formal way, but I know that the depression actually got worse the more I drank. I'm not sure if the two are correlated, but I know the reason I drank was because of the imposter syndrome and the people pleasing and the perfectionism, and putting those incredibly high standards on myself, and not only incredibly high standards, but then no room for failure in any of that. And so it was a lot of dealing with that, and then the pressure of this was all self-imposed. A lot of people say, well, was it because your boss put a lot of work on you? I had no more work than any other battalion commander. My problem is that I didn't have any healthy outlets to deal with it.
What would you say to anyone that's watching that is maybe resonating with the habits that you were doing, or drinking alcohol too much, maybe using it? Like, what would you say to them?
Yeah, and this is the same thing I would have said to my old self, is it's not going to get any better the longer you wait. That was always my thing. Looking back, I would say, well, I'll go talk to somebody after the battalion goes through this mission readiness exercise.
Yeah.
Or I'll go talk to somebody after the next rotation of teams goes downrange. I was always moving that line forward. I knew I had to talk to somebody, and I knew exactly who to talk to because I'd sent soldiers there before. I'd been there before through ASAP. My thing was, I didn't want to acknowledge that I had this weakness, that I didn't have the right answer. And so what I would say is that the first step is the hardest, and the first step requires vulnerability, but taking that first step is a heck of a lot easier than going through a suicide attempt and treatment and all these other things. And so catching it early and catching it with the right mentality is key, because the first time I went through ASAP, I didn't want to get sober. Alcohol was my solution. It hadn't let me down, and I was just going to get people off my back. I was going to treatment for everybody else. The second time I was going to treatment for me, and that's why that second time around it stuck.
So I'm not familiar with that much with the ASAP program. Is it sort of traditionally based therapy, or sort of word circles? How does that work? Like, 'cause what I would like to do is identify the things that really helped you in your healing process out of that.
Yeah. So ASAP made a transition to SUDSI, substance use dependence. Yeah, my SUDSI counsel is going to kill me.
That's acronyms in the military, man.
Yeah, SUDSI. So the second time around, I had an excellent counselor. There was individual therapy, and then there was group therapy as well. And that, in conjunction with other civilian programs, was key for me. And so when I went through, let me back up. When I went through rehab, there's a lot of CBT, there's a lot of group therapy, there was a lot of individual therapy, and then there was just different group activity that we would do through treatment. And what that really does is that's like the reset button. Rehab is like the reset button. That was my experience. And then I went through outpatient with my SUDSI counselor for about 6 months. And we did continuing therapy there, group therapy, individual therapy. And then, I to this day continue my program of recovery through other groups that are out there. And so the thing with alcoholism in my mind is that it's never, I have to do this for the rest of my life because I'm an alcoholic. And whether or not I take care of myself, I'm still going to have to go out and work my recovery program, or else I'm going to start slipping backwards. And I see it all the time in myself. If I don't work my recovery program, then I start to get restless, irritable, and discontented, and um, I feel like crap until I start going back and being of service to others and trying to help as many people as I can. That's when I start to feel better, and that's when my mind goes back to, okay, this is the healthy way to cope with things, and not whatever my brain wants to bring in and substitute for alcohol, whether it be food, candy, work, online shopping, whatever it may be. My brain is, to this day, is still looking for things to fill that gap.
Anything for that dopamine hit. I feel
yeah,
good.
that's right. And so what I've learned is that spirituality is the best way to mitigate that feeling. And so spirituality and service are my go-tos. And so every morning I have my meditation and prayer routine. And then every week I've got to do some kind of service, whether it's through the MOAA, whether it's through other volunteer organizations here in town that I'm a part of. One's called the Defense Gang here in San Antonio. Another one's volunteering, like we talked about. There's got to be some kind of service that goes on. Even this podcast is something that I would consider of service. And so that's the way that I stay rooted in my recovery.
And one thing I wanted to ask about, because I'm not sure if I'm familiar or if other people would be familiar with the phrase, when you say work the program, what specifically does that mean?
Yep. So, through treatment, through outpatient, and then now through my recovery, there are certain different, I don't know what to call them, exercises or habits that you can form that help people work through what they do. So my program is really rooted in service. And so how do I help other alcoholics?
Gotcha.
How do I help just other people in general? And then my prayer and meditation routine. So to me, that's my program. And so if I stop doing those things, I would consider that stopping the work in my program. And it's when I can't or don't work my program. I can always work my program, but when I don't work my program, that's when I start to feel those negative feelings like, oh, why am I so frustrated right now? Why do I just have this general angst going on? Well, you haven't done anything of service in a week, and so I got to go back out there and try something.
And you mentioned spirituality. I'd love to hear more about your particular views and how that's really helped you and kind of supported you during this.
Yeah,
if you're open to sharing.
Absolutely. So I grew up Catholic, and I tell people, and I'm still Catholic. Our family's Catholic, and so I tell people all the time that I was religious, but I wasn't spiritual as a Catholic. And what that meant was I would show up to church, I'd go to all the activities, I would recite the words, I would do all the things, but there was no relationship there with any kind of higher power. In my mind, I felt that everything I had earned, everything I'd done was because of me, and there's nothing outside of me that could have affected it. And that's why I was trying to control and trying and anticipate every variable in everything that ever happened, was because I didn't trust a higher power of any kind that could turn those types of things over to and say, hey, this is out of my control. God, you take it. And even through my recovery journey, it wasn't necessarily God for everybody. It was just something bigger than themselves. And one of my buddies always says, well, did you cause the sunrise this morning? No, well, that's bigger than you then, right? And so, and so just finding out that there's something outside of me that I can trust, that I can turn some of these burdens over to was hugely helpful. And for me, my higher power, I call God. And so a lot of that prayer and a lot of that turning over is part of my recovery journey in spirituality. And so, heavy in prayer, asking God to keep me sober, asking God to help me do the next right thing, and helping me discern whatever God's will is for me for the day. And so, I have friends in recovery who tell me, I've always had an issue with, well, how do I know if it's God's will and it's not my will? And they say, well, typically if it's for you, it's your will. If it's for somebody else, it's God's will. No, that's pretty. So, so that's a large part of my spirituality, is that constant contact and relationship with God, and helps me realize what I'm not in control of, and it helps me turn things over to God. That I know I can't control, and so a lot of the time I'll say, the action is mine. I do the next right action, and the outcome is up to God. And then my meditation is just clearing my mind, letting thoughts flow through, just calming it down, because a lot of what got me in trouble was overthinking. And I know having an empty mind is tough. And so I just let the thoughts come through. Just being still, being with myself, being in silence has always been tough for me. And so that exercise helps me out as well. And a lot of the time I find myself just communicating with my higher power throughout that time as well. So that's a daily morning practice for me. When I sit down at my desk, I don't turn anything on. I look out the window, which is here, in my office, or I'll sit out on the back porch if it's early enough and there's nobody out. And that's when I do my spiritual and my meditation practice.
I love that, man.
Yeah.
And what sort of people are you trying to serve now? Like, what sort of people might want to get in touch with you, and how might they do that?
Yeah, it's really anybody who wants to talk, whether it's the individual that has a problem with substance abuse or alcohol, or they're struggling with somebody, a family member or a friend with the same issues. There's avenues, that we can go down to help both of those folks. And so I still help people who are going through what I went through. My program of recovery is working with other alcoholics to help them through the same process to find the type of sobriety that I've got. And one of the other things I do too is into coaching, and so I wanted to figure out, how do I take my experience and what I love to do in the Army and bring them together to help other people. And that's called I do leadership coaching to that end. And so really, if anybody wants to reach out, I'm more than welcome them to do so. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's the best way to just DM me through that social media platform. It's the only one I've got, and so it's the best way to shoot me a note.
Eric, ERIC, Kreitz, KREITZ. Did I get that correct?
That's correct.
Awesome. A coaching website. Do you have a coaching website up yet, or just LinkedIn for now?
Nope, nothing up and running yet. My LinkedIn is my go-to at this point.
Anything else on your mind, brother, that you want to share or kind of go into?
Not at this point. I think just a really important thing is that there is something on the other side of the void. This story has kind of gone around a little, and I like to tell it. It's been on a couple TV shows, but it's the story of the alcoholic in the woods. And I always thought, it was tough to get help until I was willing to get it, and then I realized that help is everywhere. There's an alcoholic. He's walking through the woods, and the woods are getting darker and darker and darker, and he's starting to lose his way. He's fighting through brush and fighting through trees and stuff, and all of a sudden he falls in a hole, and he can't get out of this hole. And so, he hears somebody walking down the path next to the hole, and he yells out for help, and it's a doctor, and he yells up for help. He's like, "Hey, doc, I'm in this hole. Can you help me get out?" And the doc's like, "I don't know, man. All I have is this medication," and tucks down the medication to the alcoholic and keeps walking. He's like, "Well, this isn't going to do any good down here." And so he, the next person walks by, and it's a preacher, and he looks down the hole, and he says, "Hey, man, what do you need?" And he goes, "I need to get out of this hole." And the preacher prays with him, and the alcoholic feels better, but the preacher leaves, but he's still down in his hole. And finally, here's a third man walking by, and looks down the hole. And goes, "Hey, man, can you help me out of here?" And turns out the guy's an alcoholic. And so the alcoholic is talking to him, and the alcoholic jumps down in the hole with him. And the man in the hole says, "Hey, you idiot, now we're both down this hole. How are we supposed to get out?" And the alcoholic says, "Hey, man, I've been in this hole before, and I absolutely know how to get out of it." Right. And so that's the story of how alcoholics are the best folks, to help other alcoholics. Docs, pastors, priests, therapists, they all have their role. And I've benefited from all of those folks. And we don't disparage those folks in, my program of recovery. And they have a place. I firmly believe that nobody understands another alcoholic like an alcoholic. And so it's key that if you are struggling with something like this, it's important to go to the counselor, seek counsel where you can, but work with another alcoholic who's been on that path to sobriety. And I think that's where I've gotten the most value, is trusting another alcoholic to help me out, and integrate those therapists, integrating those pastors and priests, and integrating those other resources into it. But the core has always been another alcoholic for me.
Love it, man.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for your time and service here, and I'm really excited to grow the Waking Warrior community and platform that I'm working on, and help encourage you and see if I can do anything, if I can be of service to you, help you grow what you're working on, send people your way. I'm absolutely happy to do that, man. I'm convinced that we need more warriors like ourselves that are doing whatever we can do to help our brothers and sisters.
Yeah, that's certainly the right way to do it. And I appreciate your work, Scotty, and what you're trying to do. The more people that are out there with these types of platforms, sharing these types of stories, the more people we're going to reach, and the more people we can help. So I absolutely appreciate what you're doing.
Appreciate it, man. Well, go Army, beat Navy.
That's
and
right.
Yeah, we'll talk very soon, brother. I've got just got a idea of something I'd love to collaborate with you on in the future. If you're ever open to creating a recovering from alcohol course that we can put on the platform. These courses are going to be available for free to people, so they can take advantage of them. And I think that a lot of this information that you have to say, kind of packaged in a way that will point people in the right direction and get them to you as a resource, is going to be really, really valuable.
Okay. Yeah, let's do it.
All right, brother. Have a great day. Please say hi to Jen and the kids for me. And thanks for your time, man. Appreciate you a lot.
Say hi to Chewy.
I will. He's sleeping when he wakes up.
Right, man.
All right,
I'll see you.
man. Be
Thanks,
well.
Scotty. Bye.
Ciao.